Okay, welcome to the Curiosity Cast here. This show in the previous times has many times been about nutrition, weight loss, people sharing their stories, whether it's former athletes or just people talking about health, fitness, and sharing some personal stories through health and fitness, right? So today, this is going to be a little bit more on the geopolitical landscape of discussing things. Okay. Now, how did I enter this field, right? You're probably, if anybody's watching, might be from nutrition, maybe not. I am just somebody observing politics, observing what people share about in politics, and realizing that I think there's other perspectives that we can take, other things that we can believe, other than what's just being told to us. When you view politics, right, from someone, from my standpoint, what I'm seeing a lot of times is we're being force-fed two possible decisions. The problem with these two possible decisions are there could be a third or fourth better decision. So many times we are just being postured to and shown the two possible outcomes of said issue created by the people running both of those first and second outcomes. And what happens then is both sides are basically operated by the same people, right? Um, it's it's called hedging your bets, right? You can look into banking, things of that sort. But basically, right, the two sides we're given are going to support the parties really in control, no matter what, or the main group in control, right? You might call it central planning, things where there's um, cooperation between governments for the same hidden agenda that's not voted upon by citizens, but secretly pushed through other organization, maybe NGOs, right? Non-governmental organizations. Those are definitely possible things that are being done. So as you study these things and right, whatever's happening, many times we're being told you got to believe this or that, you know, or just this because of that. But there's only usually two items, and both teams are operated. So now it's interesting to really absorb politics after COVID, at least for me, right? Always knew kind of there's some clear rigging going on involved, or you know, hidden agenda that the citizens, are starting to realize are many aspects of life don't make sense. You start to review, holy cow, we pay that much in taxes. Holy cow. We're in that many countries throughout the world, over 100 countries. We have military presence there. So, but we can have some quality road, or our government uh, education system is severely um, misaligned with the citizens' current morale. It's trying to create a future morale, right? They're trying to advance morale, quote unquote, or character or past things that people like to do, right? Past civilization or past ideologies, and they're trying to just wash ideologies out of people through public education, right? Pushing current viewpoints and being subconsciously penalized for believing certain things. So you can take a guess at what those topics would be, right? Of course, race, of course, religion, right? They're just they're gonna sex, of course, recently. So when you start to see, wow, if you're educated in this system, they're pushing you to believe a certain thing, and then you look into why, right? Why are these things being pushed on us? And this is just a perspective that, right, have lived through, obviously, the Trump election in 16, very interesting. Like we're just taking a broad, right? This episode here is just going to be some broad strokes of kind of how I came to questioning a lot of the current events, right? I'm not just saying, hey, believe this or that. No, right? Coming to your own conclusions. These are just things that I saw, maybe mishaps, maybe things that just didn't make sense. Um, so that's some of the questions we have, right? And the government funds so many things too. So that's another interesting thing. When you just start to review where does government spending, how does this happen, right? Like it's a very interesting thing to review how much money you give, how many billions of dollars are given. it just doesn't make sense why we give that much money. You review maybe in the Civil War, no, in the Revolutionary War, right? We fought that over 1 to 3% taxes, from my understanding, on a few different items that were commonly used by those citizenry. So 1 to 3% taxes, revolution, of course, was explained to be started because of many of those taxes paying back to England from North America, from the United States, uh, British colony. So it's interesting. Now, you start to review more. All right, once again, why? This episode's really just about understanding what are some reasons why we might come to different conclusions than what is commonly understood, right? A big thing too is understanding secret society, and not understanding it per se, but at least understanding that there are secret societies. Maybe you don't fully understand them, right? I can't claim I fully understand these, but there's things going on where there seems to be some sort of coerce evil, masquerading as religion, but it doesn't seem to be. I don't know how valid of these like so-called groups or religions are, right? Because I don't know the the admirable traits seem to be lacking for these organizations. So as you review, right, people in power, and then you review the organizations they're tied to, and then you review their ethical code, having a a well-to-do society or well-built society or well-connected society, when there are key differences in people's belief, right, doesn't always make sense. And how that would work, I'm not entirely sure, right? I'm not don't have the answers on all that, but there seems to be some clear character issues between certain groups who, you know, claim to be certain things, but it just doesn't seem to be those the deeper you look into those, it doesn't seem to be too admirable. Now, such an interesting thing. I've traveled, I've been in California, Oregon, all throughout the eastern coastline. And I swear, in almost every town, there are lodges, so those are just there. And the evil behind kind of what goes on there, when you start to look into the degrees of where it starts out as and what it turns into, to really how this power seems to be grabbed. Um, it's a lot of rough stuff. So something I think a lot of people, right? You see these people, Alex Jones, Nick Fuentes, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm starting to get introduced to what some of these topics are, right? But then what's important to realize is this media landscape has just been um, from cable television television to social media. Really, that's how it's been. So now they have control of both groups, right? They've got control of the liberal influencers online, and then they have control of the conservative influencers for the most part. And they control these influencers and they use them as pressure valves to basically, to get ahead of certain topics, right? So, or it's really, we would call that controlled opposition if the more crew, populist party, right? Maybe that third alternative, that populism, um, people from both sides, but just looking for truth. That's where that's their worst nightmare, right? Look into JFK, look into these populist candidates that happen once in a generation. Um, once every 50, 60 years, it seems like there's just somebody who's really trying to do something. They don't want that. So that real serious change around on the tipping point, I think there was a tipping point around the time of JFK and intelligence. You look back to McKinley and that assassination, a tipping point between um, backed currency and fiat-based currency, what we currently have. So these tipping points, um, when there's something unjust going on in the country, right? Switching of a backed currency to one that can be inflated by central banks. That's a key change in the United States of America. And then you look at JFK and how basic, of course, I was talking about spending earlier, government spending, but how that turns into intelligence throughout the world and and overthrowing so many countries in South America, so many countries in the Middle East, so many countries in Africa, that and how CIA backed operatives and French groups and all these different things just completely take over countries and then and try to institute a new regime. Crazy. So McKinley, JFK, two big turning points as you look back into history. That was the first thing that got me into politics. Um, reviewing the death of JFK, very uh, very nuanced, but pretty shortly you will tend to see it's what we were told in the textbooks, who are written by certain people, who are published by certain people. When you look into that, right, you you start to be real skeptical because supposedly the most powerful, beloved, important person in your country somehow is now dead and there's no answer. Doesn't seem to really make sense, does it? So, you know, interesting stuff. So, those are some turning points. Of course, as I mentioned, COVID previously. It's so why to have this perspective of just as you see things rush to you, information rush to you, and as you're expected to have a snapshot decision of how you completely believe and morally align, remember they're trying to influence you to pick a side right away and be stuck with that side, and maybe both sides are bullshit. It's a pretty important thing to consider, right? And as I'm sure as many people listening has operated through life, you tend to just kind of get wronged once in a while by an industry. And what I mean by that is you look in the medical industry. It's just it seems like more of a system with a lot of net negatives to many of these drugs being prescribed, many of these practices. If you just look into breast cancer and mammograms, it's like that correlation doesn't seem to be positive, does it? But we're told to believe a certain thing to just, do what you're told, get these scans. Um, so it's interesting, looking at Ray Pete and what he talks about with X-rays. Um, it's pretty intense. So, right, health industry, not really trusting it, right? You look into vaccines, did a project back when I was in college, 2019. I still remember this, man. Did a project on flu vaccine and vaccines alike and autism. And in 2019, I wrote this paper, right? This was when I was doing health and human services undergrad study, just kind of researching it, get into it, right? Um, you know, it was just I was interested in counseling mental health too, but just there were certain things I started to hear rumblings right when I was even younger. It was just like there's something to do with autism and vaccines, and then um, really looking into that and seeing those correlations. So I wrote a paper on it. Thought to be just backed by fact, right? I did my sightings. If I had anything of like real analytical concern, I would cite my sources, right? X percent in vaccines equal X percent in autism, right? Just thought I had some solid sources and I was killing it the whole year. Got an A minus, and I was like, damn. And then he wrote like just wrong day. Like he basically was like this, I can't give this an A because this isn't the right thing. And I was just like, what do you mean? And it was just like an unbacked by data claim, right? Like there was just rather I'm like don't say that. That's messed up. But it's like it's not messed up if there's a correlation, is there? So, you know, there's a lot of cancer research out there. How much is actually donated to solving it or treating it? I think all of it's donated to just how to perpetuate this treatment process and maybe make it so you can live easier, or maybe a higher survival rate or something. But not even that. Like they just don't care how cancer is really created. It's and as you look into the studies of repeat and other things about inflammation, polyunsaturated fats, there are certain things that just seem to correlate to cancer and why cancer from a bioenergetics perspective would be created. So interesting, interesting. But the vaccine, right? We were forced to be for much of the population, you were forced, right, to take a vaccine against your will. Like that's crazy. To get a paycheck, you had to take this injection that had no long-term data whatsoever, and there seemed to already be inklings of conspiracy by the vaccine organizations and the government that they seem to be conspiring to make a product that would be used by so many people so fast. Just didn't seem right. Like we're just gonna get tested out with this injection, and every batch, I'm sure they're adjusting. Like, oh fuck, we killed this many people, or oh fuck, or maybe they wanted it to. Who knows? But it's just like, man, we got forcibly injected like some freaking hens, or like some freaking cattle at a cattle ranch. They just each one goes in the pen, injected. Um, like it's not even a thing. It's just everything gets injected. And they forced a government and a company forced that upon society. That you just have to take this injection. Like, man, I don't know. What happened to the network signal around that time too? I think that's an interesting thing to point out. Right? And a lot of these things I'm bringing to light, I'd encourage you to just research. So, not out here making some outlandish claims myself per se. I'm just working to connect the dots. I think that's an important thing in this political landscape too, depending on where you get your information. Starting to connect the dots. I think that's incredibly helpful. You know, um, there are clearly just some connections of individuals, which are inherently seems to be inherently very negative. So I would yeah, do your own research on many of these topics, come to your own conclusions. These are just things that I think happen to be interesting around this current political landscape. What else? What else do I talk about often? Man, I think that in immigration, man, that's interesting, right? There's some interesting stats. Whatever, last 5 years, 10 million people came in. Last 30 years, 60 million people came in, something like that. Um, that's an interesting topic, isn't it? Right? Like, man, that's an incredible amount of people to put in one country that aren't from the country to expect the country. Um, I don't know what to expect of the country, man. What? It just became like a shipping yard, just every country, couple mil, like holy, a couple mil, dude, a couple million people, just put them somewhere and just ex a couple million. That's like, you know how many people that is who don't even know your culture at all? Boom, good luck. Boom, just be sending people in around the country. How'd they even get around the country? What kind of charities, what kind of tax exempt charities are the ones paying for this movement throughout the country? You think they just freaking, they're not loaded up, all of them, man? Shit. They've had some assistance getting here. Right? Right? Pay your tithing to that, right? Man, crazy. So, I think so many of us believe in things to a religious extent. Maybe it is religion, you believe in it to a religious extent. Maybe religion you believe to a political extent and an identity extent, but not really a true spiritual extent. But whatever you believe in to that extent, right? You look into the history of it, you know? I'd really encourage that. Not look into, you know, what you want to look into, but look into some serious facts about the creation of religion, where these come from, where they're based out of, and I think that's that's what makes sense, and that's the alternative viewpoint. Is okay, yeah, you can look on Twitter and freaking rage out or whatever, but if there's a topic that interests you, just start to research it, read a book or two about it, really get a real viewpoint on it. Maybe until then, you don't have to have a perspective. There's some things I don't know enough about to talk about, you know. It's tough to keep tabs on everything politically, man. Um, how about 50-year mortgages, right? I'm sure when everyone voted for Trump, that's what they're hoping for. Make houses so unaffordable that you have to take out 50 years of a loan. Man, and don't even bother talking about if you pay tax on a home, you don't own it, man. What are we talking about? Like if you purchase something, right? If you purchase something like this coffee, I don't have to pay tax every time I use it in my own house, do I? I already bought my coffee, man. So if you buy a house and it's already freaking good, paid off, you shouldn't have to pay taxes. And why the hell do you have to pay the government taxes every time? Like back in the day, okay, I gave a freaking like think about that. You live in a tribe, 100, 200 people, right? So one of your buddy gives you 20 bucks and you're like, all right, like everyone pays they go into the camp once a month, they pay their toll, they're due to keep the walls up to everyone, the fucking blacksmith or what the fuck, um, you know, some corn or whatever, like for your tribe. And then somebody's like, yeah, every time you like give each other money back and forth to do stuff, you got to pay the tribe. It's like every transaction, dude, that's OD. And you said I have a house within this wall and just I have to pay ta just for my house. I have to pay taxes, not for specific parts of what I'm given. Just you got to just pay taxes for your house every year. It's like, but this is my land. Don't I own the land? Who owns the land? I didn't think this was public land. So why would I pay taxes on this? If you're camping in public land, paying taxes, sure. Those aren't your roads. They're public. But if it's private, if something's privately owned, why would somebody privately have to pay taxes? So I think that's just an interesting argument or an interesting perspective to take and just some questions to think about. And then usury, right? That's 50 years of usury. Holy cow. I mean, wow. Think about what's being perpetuated upon us, You went from a nation who was cared about each other, and now it's one that you're gonna get kicked in the face to try to get, you know, point 0.6 of, a sixth of an acre, like, um, you know, 60% of an acre, whatever the hell it is. Like, fuck, man, that's rough. So it's interesting. AI just buzzing along, right? Isn't that interesting? AI is just buzzing along. It's just been, I feel like we've been completely programmed on AI, like programmed to think about AI. Isn't that interesting? Like it seemed like initially, just from my point of view, AI was brought in and we were told to be kind of nervous about it. Like that was the vibe that we were given from Elon Musk originally on whatever, Rogan, or when AI started to come into the picture of just normal conversation, it seemed to be something like, oh, we got to watch out for that. That's like robots coming in, 2050. And then a year or two later, it seemed like they picked their group to launch and people just started having AI everywhere. It was just the thing now. It's the new Google. Um, and now it's replacing a ton of people in the workplace, work, of course, you know, and that brings in another interesting topic where you think about, you think about AI replacing most of the workforce, and then you think about the transition period, and there's maybe two, well, definitely more than two after what I've explained earlier in this episode, but there's more than two possibilities. But right, the two that I think would be Maybe more likely positions taken by the groups that are in power. It's probably going to be something like, UBI. Um, but that transition period between UBI is going to be an interesting one. So it could go peacefully and it could not. Right. I think that's an interesting perspective. And these are just kind of thoughts, right? Just things I think it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of people in the know, but not everyone in the know talks about it. Not saying I'm in the know, but there's people who get it, man. But there's some people who are you just need to freaking chat about it, And then you start to think, oh yeah, shit. What am I talking about? Yeah, this shit's fucked up. Or yeah, cities make you gay. Something like that. You start to just realize some stuff. So when you start to do that, yeah, start to wake up, man, politically. So I don't know what I was talking about there. A lot of interesting things. A lot of interesting things going on. Of course, there's war. There's legit war. Just people getting shot, killed, brutally killed. And when you talk about taxes, both of these wars we are involved in funding. So let's just repeat this sentence so then we can just be kind of start to become clear with our expectations for how our view our government. Okay. We are funding both wars within the world, within the realm that we know. We are funding both wars. We, as in me and you, tax-paying citizens, are funding two wars right now. So we talked about you're going through a war for your health, whether it's nutrition, this education system, finance, of course, with usury, monopoly, of course. Before UBI, right? There's a few companies now, very much a monopoly. And these people in power, like these groups in power, a lot of them, making the most of the money, their labor's not in the United States. It's not in the United States, man. What are we doing here? All right. This is once again, this turns into geopolitics pretty quickly, but that'll probably be name of an episode, geopolitics review. And that's what it feels like, right? Geopolitics, man. Companies are killing it, right? They're making a lot of money, right? Somebody makes a good amount of money, and whether it's their apparel is coming from Vietnam or they sent their factories down to Mexico, there's just when people start to make money, you start to realize that there's other ones taking advantage of to elevate themselves. You've got to freaking um, you got to use some international labor, man. I mean, even people do that now. Virtual assistants, whatever it is, being a website, all international. So it's like, wow, these people in the United States, we're just to get up, you got to just fucking use other countries. And in many of these cases, right? Even for H-1Bs. So it's like, wow, okay. Interesting there. But funding wars, innocent people dying, right? It's interesting. There's a party in power, and really what their religious beliefs are really moral, obviously more importantly, almost more importantly than religious, what are their moral beliefs? And those seem to be there's something left to be desired there. We I think most people would be on the same boat about that, right? There's less to be desired than the morals of our politicians. So having some thought about that. think's pretty valuable. Um, but that's some thoughts right now. What else is going on? Got some red light glasses on and red light incandescent bulb in my lamp over here. So that's what you're seeing. Why the color kind of looks fucking crazy. But geopolitics, interesting. Other things going on. You can buy a truck from Toyota for 15K now that there's emissions have been passed. So that's pretty cool. What else is going on? Let me pull up X, see what else is going on, right, politically. Right, listen to all these people talk about politics. Or not even, I don't listen that often, but I'll see their videos. And once in a while I listen to their podcast. And it's just like, man, these guys are clearly just like they're collecting their personal views based on these established groups, and that's all. Like they won't have thoughts on different sides all over. And I enjoy having thoughts, whatever deemed truthful, right? Uh, so I think that's a really important thing to recognize, right? Well, I think that's all we need for today. But those are some political viewpoints. Where's the government money going? Right? I think that's a really important thing to start to review. Where is the healthcare money going? What's it funding? Is the government money funding? Where are the taxes going? So, are there monopolies involved? Historical events, right? Assassinations, why'd they happen at certain turning points? What's happening against our will? How has that happened previously throughout time? And how people responded? How have things been positive after? Rarely, but positive after. Now have things been negative? And what can we do to avoid those past mistakes throughout history that we've seen? Man, do the best you can to I think dose yourself with sometimes truth seeking or deep diving. Yeah, sometimes just need to give yourself a few minutes to just a rest too. You can't always just be freaking researching everything. When you really get into the truth, you start to look in, like once I said, like government, war, race, religion. If you just right scrape away your identity politics and you just start to review these topics, right? And kind of wherever I am, it's been fun recently too, talking about politics in the public, right? I think it's a fun perspective. And really, if people talk about cancel culture, one way to step out of that is just stating your political viewpoints or just your viewpoints about what you believe. State those out loud and have confidence. Because if you do that, that means it should be backed up by some truth and actually being educated upon a topic and educating yourself and then creating your own opinion. And that's all I could advocate for is educating yourself. Look at who's educating you. And if they have certain political leanings, ideologies, agenda that they're pushing, review that before and during your learning process and even after sometimes. Right? I've had people I learn from and then I hear something about their character and it being negatively impacted. And I do tend to lose respect for them quickly if it's true. And man, there could be a better example than Epstein files about that, right? Like many of these powerful people are just doing crazy stuff. And it seems like no one really wants to talk about that. Like they'll talk about the Epstein files, right? They'll talk about the Epstein files, FBI is going to maybe release them. They breeze over these topics, we released Epstein files, but what are really we talking about here? We're talking about almost everyone in power, like billion-dollar power, like education, highest government officials, highest health care officials, highest pharmaceutical officials, movie industry, finance, the people. in the tops of all of these groups that I just talked about earlier today, war, are all implicated. The people kind of doing banking, you know, religion, they're all implicated together in these said files. Now, what are we talking about in those said files? Well, some really disgusting things. And then we realize who's implicated, the vast amount of people. And it's like, wait a second. Are we just getting, and I think that's this is something about politics that's kind of it's starting to it's starting to enter some people's minds. Like it was before kind of a joke, but now it's the truth. Like, or it seems like it starts to seem as that, or it's politics just seems to be a complete joke. The deeper you look into it, you're like, wait a second. Every single person is getting money from the ADL, or every single person is getting these crazy freaking financial pushes from these weird industries, or people from the same group over and over again controlling our congressmen, sipping on some bone broth here. But man, everyone in politics is being influenced by people other than their electorate. They're people electing them. So that seems to be off, right? That doesn't really make sense to me. Okay, you've got the people voting for you and the people giving you money, and the people giving you money, they have more control of you than the people who voted for you. So it seems like our democracy is maybe a 60-40 split between money and and actual votes. So like if somebody's just getting all the financial banking, they got probably 50% of the money. So then if they got 20% of vote, they're still winning. Like money matters more than the vote because money changes so many people's opinions because many people it seems like are complete, I don't know, NPCs about the fact that they can just get influenced. Maybe 65, 75% of people, at least 50, are just, if they just market it really well. And if all the movies are about one political ideology and don't cross over the other one, everyone's just going to be on board. It's interesting about that. So some things to keep in mind, Coca-Cola here, Ray Pete style. But right, ask some questions, curiosity cast about geopolitics. We'll have some more guests on in the future. We'll get back into some nutrition, some people about losing weight, some weight loss basics. You know, I've been talking a little bit on social media about reducing protein, and that seems to get some people interested slash confused. So happy to talk about that more in the future. It's been some interesting studies on that. Not necessarily always just reading studies, but definitely reading different opinions, reasoning behind it, and then testing it personally as well, oftentimes, which is a fun thing about nutrition. The fun thing about politically, you can just put yourself in this group and just like, how would I feel if I put myself in these people's shoes? You know? So it's an interesting one to consider. But either way, geopolitics, Curiosity Cast, episode, I don't know what it is, 8 or 9. We'll see you later.